outnumbered today.
It must be the AI, Benjamin.
It must be the AI.
It must be.
I think we could get starting. Just to all the participants, please note that the session will be recorded as well as transcribed. And if you do want access to the recording or the transcription at any time, that will be made available to you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's session. I think the topic is quite self-explanatory, but also a very, very important one. Before we get into the discussion, I'd like to just give a brief overview of each of the speakers. We have Sabrine, who is a researcher at the University of Liverpool, studying the history of AI and algorithms, specifically the contributions of Islamic mathematicians. Her research is part of a UK research and innovation supported collaboration between the University of Liverpool and the World Museum Liverpool to re-examine the history of AI from a fresh global and decolonial perspective. She completed a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a master's in philosophy from the Annamalai University in India, and worked as an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at Cluster University. And before she relocated to the UK, she was conducting research on the topic of Iqbalian metaphysics and its application to contemporary scientific discourse on quantum physics, consciousness, and fine-tuning. Professor Smart is a professor of philosophy and the director for the Center of Philosophy and Epidemiology, Medicine and Public Health. He specializes in the application of philosophy to public policy, particularly in the context of health and well-being. He has published 3 monographs, authored the Center for Global Development's report on the indirect health effects of COVID-19 interventions in South Africa, and is currently working on a British Academy project on integrating social media reports into evidence-based public health policy frameworks. While Prof. Smart acknowledges the potential positive impact of AI in the fields like healthcare, he's deeply concerned about its potential societal impacts more generally. And lastly, we have Prof. Hima, who is a professor at the Academy of Computer Science and Software Engineering in the Faculty of Science at UJ. Her areas of research include automatic face and expression recognition using machine learning, recurrent neural networks, and deep learning-based spatiotemporal analysis, effect analysis, and human-computer interaction. Prof. Vadapalli has worked in application areas, namely health sciences, financial forecasting, multimodal biometric systems, and education, and is an NRF-C-rated researcher. This is for sure a dream team, and I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's views. I'm almost intimidated. So let's get cracking. Prof. Hima, I'm going to start with you because I think it is the more technical things. Can you explain to us in very simple terms what is AI, and can you explain how AI algorithms actually learn from data? And yeah.
Okay, thank you for that question. So AI, artificial intelligence, is one of the subfields of computer science, and really the focus is to create systems that can perform tasks that align with human intelligence. So it asks us to kind of develop, deploy those systems that typically require human intelligence. It can be something from recognizing images, recognizing speech, what we are doing now. You asked me a question, I understand, and I respond to you. It can be making predictions and decisions in financial systems, e-commerce, and so on. And over the period of time, learn from the data and improve based on the experience. So in short, we are looking at systems that can perceive, that can reason, and also act in the ways that mimic human intelligence. So that, in short, is what is AI. And when it comes to how AI algorithms learn from data, we need to first talk about data collection. So it's the process of gathering information. Again, it can be image data, it can be textual data. For example, patient health information, medical records, it can be data that's coming from sensors and so on. And the understanding is that the more data we have, a better understanding the system would have, in most cases, that is. In other words, you are giving data points to the algorithm to learn more and understand the patterns. Once you pass through the data phase, we then talk about what we call as feature representation. So for example, if you talk about an image, the pixel values are the features that we are interested in. And if I can then talk about the three main paradigms as to how you build these intelligent systems or AI systems, if we are in the domain of supervised learning paradigm, you have data, that's the image. Let's say it's a dog or a cat image, and then there is a label that comes along with it to say that this is a cat or this is a dog. And the system looks at the images along with the labels in the supervised learning paradigm and tries to make a mapping between the images and the labels that are given. We do have other paradigms such as unsupervised learning, where there are no labels that are given, just the images, or reinforcement learning, where the agent interacts with the environment, learns based on whether there is, it's like, you're trying to train a dog and then say, if the dog fetches the ball, oh, good dog. And then if the dog doesn't fetch the ball, then you say bad dog. So the agent, the dog itself there, is interacting with the environment and understands when do I get a reward, when do I receive a penalty based on the feedback. So, yeah. And once you have an understanding of the data, we go through the process of what we call as training. In short, it's the process of, if you have a model, let's say you might have heard about artificial neural networks, one of the baseline deep learning models. Those would be, there'll be some weights associated with these networks, those are the parameters that get trained when you have these images and the annotations, or text and annotations, based on some kind of a loss function that says, how closely am I predicting the true ground truth value? And by adjusting these weights using some state-of-the-art algorithms, the simplistic would be a gradient descent algorithm. You adjust the weight so that over the period of time, over the number of epochs, as the model is seeing more and more data, it learns to do the right thing. And we then go to what we call as an inference phase, where you actually go and deploy it in a real-time situation where it has to now predict values, decide, make decisions on data that's unseen. So that's the whole pipeline that you start from, all the way from data collection, extracting the features, training, optimization, and then the last is the testing or the inference phase.
Okay, so that's quite interesting. So I get supervised learning, unsupervised learning, deep learning, and I assume from what you were saying that a system is only as good as the data it is fed, or the data that it's learning from.
Yes.
Okay. So what are hallucinations? Because I think this is one of the big problems that we're experiencing in higher education at the moment. If you're saying that the data is labeled and this is what it is, or it's learning from a set of data, how can it also make up things that doesn't exist?
Okay. So, I mean, hallucinations, if I can explain it from the ChatGPT perspective, because that's where we ended up. So in our context, a hallucination would be, I'm trying to, understand a research topic, and ChatGPT then, because it is limited, it is trained on certain data, right? And it doesn't now have a context. So what it tries to do is hallucinate a reference article or a research article that never existed. So hallucination happens with these models because it's a scenario where it looks too good to be true, but it's not true. It's usually false, it's misleading, or it's made up. And the reason why hallucinations happen in AI systems is, first and foremost, they lack the real world grounding. We as humans, we cross-check our references, we cross-check what we are saying, and then respond. The models that are used to generate these text-based narratives, for example, like ChatGPT, they are not actually trying to, truth check when they are generating these answers. Sometimes there might be ambiguity in our question. So if I don't understand what you're asking me, an AI system would just try and gather information, whatever information it had, and try to reproduce an answer for you, which is not in line with what I have asked. So if there is ambiguity in the question itself, the input is vague, the output will be vague as well. That's the disadvantage. And again, going back to the data, if there are gaps in the training data, as you have rightly said, you can't expect the system to answer correctly. Now, how do we then make these systems hallucination foolproof, right? That's one thing that we must be interested in. So we can start off with clearly clarifying the questions, or the AI agent itself must ask follow-up questions. If you have interacted with ChatGPT, sometimes it says if your question is too vague, it says, can you clarify whether you are interested in one topic or the other topic? It's ambiguous. So that's one way of clarifying the question so that it doesn't give you answers that look unreal or give false information. Again, one of the other features is when it provides multiple perspectives. So if you are not sure as to what was being asked, we also, as humans, we give multiple perspectives. So we can always design AI systems that provide multiple perspectives, and then we take whatever answer that, aligns with what the question we asked. And at the end of the day, it can also stay neutral. If I don't want to answer, AI system can do the same thing and say, look, I want to stay neutral. I don't want to get into this political debate. Let me not answer this question.
But GPT will never say, I don't want to answer this question. It's just, I guess it's always wanting to give you an answer. Now, is it a possibility, and excuse my ignorance, for a programmer to put a fact checker in the algorithm to say, okay, it's going to push this out now, go back a step, check if that actually exists, and then push out the date? Is that possible?
It's possible, but again, remember, if it's coming from a resource that's actually was not fact-checked at the beginning, it will only take information from there. Let's say in my example, if I provide certain information on my blog, right, it was not fact-checked, ChatGPT will only capture that information and give it to me. Even if for it to go back and check, it can do in certain scenarios, but if the source itself is wrong, how do we do that?
No, of course. And we've seen that some universities in South Africa are now backtracking, taking away these plagiarism detectors or the AI detectors. What role do explainability and interpretability play in building trustworthy AI systems? And how can we ensure that that actually happens, particularly in AI, which is a content-based sort of area or discourse? How do we build trustworthy AI systems?
Okay. If we can first take a step back and understand the difference between interpretability and explainability. Now, interpretability is how easily a human can understand what an AI model is doing. Are we able to, for example, if let's say we have in one of the top banks here in South Africa, you have an AI agent that you have an AI agent that takes in the loan applications and makes a decision. Now, interpretability means they're understanding what features that the system has looked at, and according to it, what are the features that mattered the most. For example, our credit score might have taken precedence over our income, or our income has taken precedence over our credit scores, etc. And explainability would be being in a position for the system to explain that clearly to the applicant. Just like if you go to the Standard Bank representative and ask, or one of the banks, I don't want to take the name of a bank, but the representative will sit down with you and explain why did your loan application was rejected, right? And explainability would be to generally being able to explain the decisions clearly to the end user. The reason why it matters most is because at the end of the day, you want your AI systems to be transparent, first and foremost. We need to know why the AI agent made a decision that it made. And it becomes very important when you are in the healthcare domain, high risk domains, where even in agriculture, and you don't want the system to take a decision to say, I need to spray so many ml of pesticides onto the field. and not being able to explain why it did so, or it detected, let's say, cancer, it needs to be in a position to just tell us which features of the image did it consider to decide what it decided on, and be able to explain in plain English for us. The other important thing is accountability. This is a huge thing because how do we now, who is held accountable for the decisions that the AI system is making? And unless we don't want the AI systems to be seen as black boxes that, you chuck in the data, something comes out, and then there's no one taking accountability of those systems. So unless AI systems are interpretable and they are explainable, there's no accountability to what it is saying. It also helps us to have systems that are fair, that are non-biased. You might have heard about a story where one of the face detection systems was flagging certain ethnic groups as, yeah. So where is the explain? Why was it flagging? There is issues with the data, but if it can explain what are the features that it was taking into consideration, to flag a certain ethnic group, at least we can go back and see the reasoning behind and fix the, the end-to-end pipeline. It also, by having explainability embedded into it, you increase the trust in the users. The users now, trust the system because it's able to explain. And all in all, it allows us to regulate the use of AI systems, considering the ethics. Unfortunately, here in South Africa, we still struggling with the AI framework. But in most of the other countries, we have established frameworks to say what is the ethical use of AI, and so on.
Thanks. Thanks. I remember a couple of years ago in the Netherlands, we had an issue about people who were not born in the Netherlands, or second, third generation from Morocco or Algeria or Turkey. When they were putting in child support claims, it was automatically rejected. And then Amnesty International actually did a big study and found it was a biased algorithm. So you do find these kinds of things. And I think it links back, links well into my next question is, in what way can the development and deployment of AI systems reflect the colonial bias or perpetuate inequalities? And I know Google was trying to mitigate this a couple of years ago. I'm sure you saw what happened, where they tried to have a multicultural approach, and it bombed horribly because all of a sudden you had a black pope, you had Chinese Vikings, and that completely skewed things in a completely other way. So how can we prevent this colonial bias?
We need to first start off with the data itself, right? If the data has embedded colonialism within itself, now you can't expect the AI system to, have non-biased, outcomes. So we need to first look at the data itself, how it was collected. Usually the data is scraped off the internet. When we build these huge data sets, usually they tend to scrape it off from the internet, or the data is produced in the global south, where it's easy to or less costly to capture data using the monetization, or the corporations usually come to the global south to scrape all the data and use it in the global north. So we need to first be careful how the data is collected and in what ways it is collected, that it didn't sabotage the rights of individuals from specific continents or specific countries. We also need to look at the language barrier and the cultural barriers in the data that is collected. We know as of now, for example, even I'll keep going to ChatGPT, most of these systems are trained in primarily in English and other dominant languages. We do have systems that can now, when you look at Google Translate, it does translations well between languages, but if you come to some of the more low resource languages, then it struggles to do the conversion for us. So low resource languages that are underrepresented would have impact on the outcomes that we are looking at. Again, There might be algorithmic biases or discrimination that happens within the AI system because it's learning from the data. So there's bias in the data, it will automatically pump into the systems itself. And they can be also algorithmic. For example, a job recommendation system that, um, uh, undervalues, let's say, women or some minority groups. If women and minority groups are not well represented in the job recommendation system when the data was collected. And the other important factor would be, where does the power lie in terms of these development and deployment of the systems? If Global North is developing all the systems, they are the one who are deploying all the systems, it is bound to happen that those systems, when get deployed into the other parts of the world, don't understand the intricacies, again, in the language or in the data, facial data or speech data and audio data and so on. So there must be some kind of an equality when you are trying to deploy this system. That's also one of the important factors that we need to look at. I think, yeah, those are the main factors that, you need to make sure that they don't affect the systems.
I'm going to ask a silly question, and I don't know if it's possible. Like you were saying that these systems are mostly developed in the global north. There's power there, there's money there, there's, the economic strength is on that side. Is it possible that these systems go through a peer review process before they are deployed? Like, for example, you're seeing Claude and Bard and everything, it's happening so fast, 5.0, 6.0. We're even speaking about the Industrial Revolution 5.0 and Hitler and, the human in the loop and all of these things. But is it possible that before it's deployed, we could have a peer review process to see that, in a way to mitigate the biases almost? Is that possible? Or is it economics that's, ruling everything?
It is possible. They actually go through a review process. It's not that a system is developed and then directly deployed. They do go through vigorous systems, but it's like if there are these blind eyes that happen, like when you are too confident about driving the car, you make those decisions, right? So it is possible that the developer themselves never realize what are the hidden gaps that are in the system. So it's not always that they do it on purpose. No, they don't. But it's just that because how the data is represented and their own perceptions of what is, embedded into the system, then yeah. But they do go through rigorous review process.
And just in closing, and I will ask anyone who wants to ask proper question, can AI systems be intentionally biased or intentionally colonial?
Okay, so you might feel that I'm biased because I'm an AI researcher, but I don't feel that the AI system, if I take AI as an act or as a tool, right? The tool itself is not biased. It's we, the developers, that end up making it biased. In other words, I would say I would choose the middle ground here to say, yes, it's biased or no, it's biased. It depends on what kind of data you're giving in, how well are you training, how well are you trying to optimize it. That's what makes it biased. The algorithm itself, the mathematical formulation, it has no knowledge. It doesn't say, I have to be biased and let me be biased. It doesn't still have that human intelligence to say, emotions and all that stuff to say, I want to be biased towards this individual and let me be biased. It all depends on the data that we are giving in and how it has picked up the information.
Okay, so at the end of the day, it all comes down to the data.
Yeah.
And we're speaking about colonialism in our textbooks, in our curriculums. That's still very much there in South Africa and elsewhere as well. And I guess it's again going back to the drawing board and saying that needs to change before the tool can be changed or AI can be improved.
Yeah, look at it in a way that if AI is controlled by few powerful nations or organizations or companies or individuals, it reproduces their colonial history. But if you develop AI systems that are inclusive, that gets in diverse cultural, participation. So if you are building a face recognition system that takes in facial images from all over the world, it has representation from all over the world between different genders, different ethnic groups, and so on, then you should be in a position to restrict how colonial the system becomes at the end of the day. But I think rather, it's very hard for AI to be intentionally colonial. If I make my point clear there, it can, however, become a vehicle for colonialism, digital colonialism. But yeah, you have to decentralize it.
I completely agree. Zahra, I see your hand. You've got a question.
Yeah, I mean, so can one then say, or let me ask it this way: if most people, most individuals are learning bias as they are socially, socialized, does it not then stand to reason that artificial intelligence would learn the same thing?
Yeah. So if the data is biased, if there is an inherent bias in the data, the system that's trained on that data is biased. So we need to look at mitigation strategies as to how do you make sure. So how do you first measure what kind of bias is in the data sets before you let it used by the training system or for the AI system? You first should be able to understand how the data distribution is, what is the class distribution, and so on. Be able to measure the bias, mitigate the bias in there are various mitigation strategies where you can then bring out the ratio between all the classes to more or less an equilibrium, and then let the system train. Again, there is possibility. We are not denying that there will be zero bias per se. That's not possible, but we can try and reduce the bias in the system. And the interpretability and explainability that we have talked before will allow us to, see whether the system is biased or not, to see whether it is also significantly looking at the features that we are looking at. And by interpreting what kind of significance it is attaching to each of these features, then we can see whether the system is acting anyway differently to what a health practitioner is, looking at, or an economist is looking at.
Thanks, Prof. Is there any other questions? Michael, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I was just wondering, what about the environmental footprint, which has been truly devastating for, so what, just training a foundation model requires the power of about a city, adding to huge carbon emissions and furthering. Is there and could there ever be a sustainable basis for machine learning, I suppose, is one of the questions. And that immediately plays into a kind of colonial power structure, extractive industry, forces of capital, and all the rest, and affects the world's poorest, the most disadvantaged, the most. So is there a way of overcoming that?
Okay, I couldn't hear the voice was a bit low, but I think I got the question. So definitely AI systems are more power hungry than our human brains. We are trying to mimic human intelligence, and there is a definite yes to say that yes, there is carbon footprint, and the amount of resources that these deep learning models or heavy models that take, it's enormous in terms of every single resource that we can talk about: memory, the computational power, the effect on the environment, and so on. So now there is a recent trend in AI research cohort to say that do we keep moving forward with more and more algorithms, with more and more deep learning, architectures that need more and more data, or are we kind of in a self-sufficient scenario where you look at not developing new models, but if the model is doing good, then you sustain with it. On a different note, we also now have scenarios looking at how do you now optimize these models. So we can think about, for example, if you want to train a system from scratch, let's say you have a translation system that translates from English to Dutch. Is it possible that we take that system and then use that system as a prerequisite if you are now doing from English to some other related language, some other language that has similar patterns of language as you know, as Deutsch. So in that case, you are constraining the amount of resources, kind of, you know, using knowledge that has previously been gained and then use it in a effective way. I hope I answered your question.
Thanks, Michael, for that question. Any other questions for Prof. Hima before we move on to Ben? Okay, so Ben's questions is a more philosophical. And if I can find my Prof. Ben, what are the current philosophical assumptions underpinning AI as it currently stands? Is it a social public good, or is it a profiteering tool? How do we philosophically look at this?
Philosophical assumptions can be interpreted in quite a lot of ways, and you know, as a philosopher, my first instinct is to think, oh, what does she mean by philosophical assumptions? And of course, you know, AI is also many things, right? These days, when people talk about AI, they tend to think ChatGPT or similar. But of course, you know, it's also surveillance software. It's used in prisons. It's used in protein folding, and you know, AI is a big thing, right? With lots of different use cases, and to some extent, the philosophical assumptions are very different, depending on, you know. You know, occasionally there are biases trained in, like we saw just a few weeks ago, Elon Musk with that whole mecha Nazi story when he got all upset because, you know, Grok told somebody that the right had actually been responsible for more deaths than the left, and so he reprogrammed it, and then, you know, you had these enormous biases. So in that sense, the philosophical assumptions aren't so much applicable to AI in general, but to, you know, the individual model and what its purpose is. But there are some kind of general, let's say, philosophically interesting things that one can say about AI. First of all, and this isn't something new. I mean, people have been talking about digital colonization for a very long time, but it's fundamentally extractivist, you know. And you asked, is it a profiteering thing? And the answer is, at least that's the intention. Right, at least that's the intention. So, you know, we start off with this massive power discrepancy, power and money discrepancy between largely US tech companies and the people from whom the data is mined, right? And then resources are mined. Cobalt, 70% of the world's cobalt comes from the Congo, and then an awful lot of the data is mined from the global south. And then what happens is, just like those old colonial pathways remain, you know, all of those resources are shipped off, they're packaged up, and then sold back to the few, right? So there are some other kind of interesting things aside from that digital colonization thing, which I think people have already talked about. There's a preference for, at least I've noticed, a preference for universal models over situated knowledge, right? So I think living in South Africa, we're quite used to the importance of context, local meanings, local histories, and so on. And what you often get from, particularly from large language models, are authoritative responses that neglect the kind of collective, cultural, intergenerational, localized knowledge systems and so on, right? They're just ignored by these bigger systems, and understandably so. I mean, they're designed in the US. Like, why would they reflect South African histories? But that's what happens, right? They're kind of universalized. Similarly, like the harms and benefits are often framed as individual, so it focuses on the user, right? Again, I'm talking largely about large language models, but we focus mainly on the user, neglecting collective cultural effects of the recommendations and so on that you might get. That's quite noticeable, I think. But I think for me, the interesting question is it a public good? And whilst to some extent the jury is still out, my personal view is that the answers in most use cases are no, an overwhelming no. I mean, first of all, it strictly can't be a public good anyway, right? So a public good has to be non-rivalrous and non-excludable, right? It can't be exclusionary. And the best large language models are sold, like they're exclusionary. If you don't have the money, you don't have access to them. So it's not genuinely public in the sense that the best models are not available to the majority of the population. And also they're rivalrous. So there are effects like were just mentioned on the environment. And I don't think this can be stressed enough. Not enough, like, again, this is not a new issue, but it's really important. It's really the unbelievable amounts of energy that this uses is like a serious thing. So, the compute, the water, the energy, like all of these things. So it strictly can't be a public good anyway. But then when you add to it, well, is society going to look better in 5 years' time? And you start to think about what the tech bros are promising. And if anything like that materializes, we're going to have an enormous unemployment catastrophe. I mean, what's going to happen to administrators? What's going to happen to radiographers? What's going to happen to architects? I mean, you can just put in the plans for the land and tell the type of house you want, and poof, up comes all the plans for your house. Like mass unemployment. And then when you have mass unemployment, people can't afford to pay their bonds. And then when people can't afford to pay their bonds, all the property prices collapse, and then everyone's in negative equity, and you end up in this huge financial crisis as well as an unemployment crisis. I mean, and on top of that, people are outsourcing their intellectual work. I mean, the whole point is to outsource intellectual work, but students are outsourcing their intellectual work to ChatGPT a lot of the time, meaning that they don't build the capacity to think through problems themselves, and that cannot be a good thing. Then you become very easily manipulable, and one of the use cases of large language models is for sure to manipulate populations. It can be used in social media platforms for politicking and so on. So, like I say, whilst the jury, I suppose, is still out, and I think there are incredible potential use cases, particularly in medicine, which is what I work on mostly. I do wonder whether it's going to be a public good, or whether all we're doing is building dependency on something that nobody ever asked for, right?
I always think that in the context of South Africa, the notion of the public good has become, it's very controversial, because if you go back in history, when we speak about the public, it's never been fully inclusive. When we spoke about the public, we always spoke about a very specific group of people. So the notion of the public good is also, in a way, a contested domain. So yeah, I guess that makes the question a bit difficult to answer as well. And my next question is with regards to agency and intelligence and consciousness of AI. But I'm just thinking, AI is there, it's artificial intelligence, it's there to mimic humans. And humans are malicious, they can be awful, they have the potential to be great, they are knowledgeable, and they also have gaps in knowledge. So is it maybe unfair of us to expect AI to be perfect? If we as humans are lacking and you are mimicking us? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, is it unfair to expect AI of anything? AI is just a tool. It's not conscious. It's not probably not anyway. I'm gonna assume it's not. It's intelligent. I mean, long ago, Alan Turing developed the Turing test, and if anyone doesn't know, the basic idea is that can you have a conversation with it and not be able to tell whether it's a human or a machine, and yeah, I think some of the large language models we have today pass that test, and in that sense, it's intelligence. But I think you've got to draw a very clear line between intelligence in that sense and agency and consciousness, right? There are AI agents in the sense that you can tell it, you can give it a goal, and it'll set out to do it or whatever. But consciousness in particular, so the kind of thing we talk about in philosophy is subjective experience or phenomenal awareness. Being able to experience pain and guilt and this kind of stuff. No, AI doesn't have that, and as a result, it's not a moral agent, and so you can't accuse it of wrongdoing. Like it's not, it can't be morally praised for anything that it does. But that doesn't mean that nobody is morally responsible for what AI does. And I think that it's kind of like a gun. People say, guns don't shoot people. People do. It's like, yeah, but they couldn't shoot people without the gun. And the exact same thing is the exact same thing is true in the AI context, right? Who's responsible for the wrongs that happen through AI? Well, the developers and the big companies that run it, the people that are involved in data collection and so on. And I'm not saying that everything these people are doing is wrong. Like there's a lot of people working on AI ethics, and there are people in these big tech companies that are doing their best at times, but certainly sometimes like the moral responsibility falls on them, and then on the user. I think really like that can't be stressed enough. The user of AI has to be responsible, both from a ecological perspective. Like, don't use it too much, guys. Like it's using a lot of energy. But also like how you use it. Don't use it to design a virus that's going to wipe out the entire population, right? Don't use it to hack banks to destroy the banking system, and don't use it to cheat on your essays. So there's a lot of ethics involved in AI, of course, but the actual AI itself can't be held morally responsible for anything. But those developing AI need to be very aware of what its use cases are, and and have a framework for understanding the indirect effects of AI.
Okay, so in that way, AI cannot be held responsible in the same manner as humans, because they intrinsically completely different things.
It has no intention, so it can't be it can't have intentional malice. It's just instrumental harm. It's not intentional malice. It can't. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of higher education specifically, what kind of philosophical questions should we be asking to guide AI developers, when it comes to education curricula specifically? I mean, how do we ensure that what we're getting from ChatGPT or any large language model is informative and knowledge-bearing and not in any way condescending or, is that possible? I know, given the context of what Prof. Hima was saying.
So how should it be used in education specifically? Yeah. Well, I think so. There was a recent study that showed that students that were using AI were using 47% less of their brain capacity than people that were writing it without the use of AI. And whilst the methodologies are questionable, and I haven't actually read the study, but just that sort of prima facie glance confirms what you'd expect, right? Like you're outsourcing your reasoning capacity, and this is not a good thing. And of course, like it's a tool for plagiarism if you want it to be, and there are ways around getting caught. But I think that it has potential for both education and research use cases for both. I think it can be used as an interlocutor, and I do this myself. I will write a paper, and then I will upload it up to the AI, and I will argue with the ChatGPT about my paper. And in that way, you're not reducing the amount you're using your brain. You're increasing the amount you're using your brain, because you're arguing with you're saying no, that's wrong, and so on. And I think that if students can be taught to use large language models in that sort of way, and warned off the other way, particularly, I love the fact that there are hallucinations at the moment. It's brilliant, because if you can demonstrate this to students, it's like, well, you're not going to get a very good mark if you rely on this hallucinating model. But if you can use ChatGPT as an interlocutor, I think it's an awful lot better. It can also serve as a bit of an equalizer for people that are writing in a foreign language, or in a second or third language. You can use some AI tools like Grammarly to improve your English in a way that's really not dissimilar to paying for a copy editor. And no one ever thought that using a copy editor was unethical. So I don't see why using Grammarly could be. And in fact, it kind of levels the playing field in a post-colonial university. So again, I think that's kind of important. I think you can use it for discovering new things that you might want to add into your curricula. I mean, as AIs improve, they're going to get better at identifying articles that you haven't read. So there are certainly like lots of use cases, but there's a lot of risks, and I think again, my concern is that the overall, when you do a cost-benefit analysis, that overall we might be losing something, particularly in education. Research, I'm less concerned about, but I'm worried because I think that a professional philosopher has the capacity to know when they're doing something right, when they're doing something wrong, and they're not it's just not the same kind of pressures that you have as a student. But I worry with the students, the risk of using AI probably outweigh the benefits, for now at least. But one final thing, I'm not at all convinced that large language models as we know them today are going to be available to students for very long anyway. I mean,
How so?
Why
do you think that?
Well, I said earlier that it was a profiteering model, right? And OpenAI started off as this, are we going to be open? Yeah. And then suddenly became a for-profit company a couple of years ago. But the thing is, whilst it's a for-profit company and whilst they're bringing in huge amounts of revenue, they're making an enormous loss. They're making billions and billions and billions of dollars of loss. They're making huge amounts. And the only reason that they're sustainable at the moment is that Sam Altman can just go to the private equity markets and be like, hey, who wants to invest another $1 billion in OpenAI? It's just keeping them afloat. They're making an enormous loss. Even the people that are paying $200 a month, they're not even close to covering the costs of AI. So my guess is that this is a huge data collection exercise. They're trying to get as many people completely dependent on AI as possible, and then they're just going to cut off the use to the free use, and probably focus on maybe small language models that are more domain specific, and sell those products at an extremely high price. I may well be wrong, but I just don't see it as being financially sustainable the way it currently works, unless the cost of energy somehow reduces by 98%. Maybe AI invents this like almost cost-free way of an environmentally friendly way of producing energy, and then yay. But barring that, like, this just isn't sustainable.
Wow. That has huge implications for universities as well, because they've changed a lot of what they do, how they do their pedagogies, their technologies. And AI has almost become a very central feature. And in your prediction, if you're saying, look, this is not going to be front and center as it is now in about 5 to 10 years, Do we go back to the way
I don't know,
things
but
were?
what I do know, Marcina, is that it's not financially sustainable the way it is at the moment. So my guess is that they're going to the models that AI is going nowhere. Like, it's really important, and like I say, it's got fantastic use cases in, for example, medicine. But you don't need a large language model for protein folding. Like, it's sort of and again, like, if you restrict the tasks that it needs to do to the tasks of an administrator in a philosophy department, right, then it doesn't need to draw as much energy as it does if it's a more general model. So my guess is the kind of general, we just have a chat with ChatGPT on our phone for free for everyone. I think that goes, because otherwise these companies are going to make an enormous loss, and companies that make enormous losses go bankrupt. You know?
For sure, for sure. Zachary, I see you had some comments there. Do you want to just tell us what your thoughts are, and then I will close with one more question?
I mean, Ben, I think that's really interesting, and to me it makes sense. I never thought about it, but it makes complete sense. But UJ, for example, has already completely deployed Copilot. And so what would happen is you just monopolize the use. So because Microsoft is already in everywhere, everyone will just start using Copilot that has access to it. And it costs a hell of a lot of money, Copilot, to deploy. I mean, I don't know who's paying UJ's Copilot bill, but they say that, educational institutions have some kind of, get sort of a discount, as it were. But I don't, I don't know. And so you'll have Copilot or nothing. Or, as you say, sort of smaller, smaller systems. And so at least the computer scientists will have lots of work, I imagine, because everyone will need to design their own. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Lastly, Ben, what does justice and representation mean in the context of AI? I mean, we've discussed the technicalities of it now, but from your view, what does that look like?
So I'm a bit of a Rawlsian. So if you ask this question to different philosophers, you're going to get different answers.
Yeah.
But let me try and be a bit broader than my own personal views. So there's like so first of all, distributive justice, right? Let's think about. So that's like who gets the benefits and the burdens. So access to compute, jobs and services versus, like, surveillance and this kind of stuff. So at the moment, there's a big question over how the benefits and the harms of AI are distributed. And the big growing literature in digital decolonization is pretty much highlighting the harms are mainly experienced by the poor in the global south, and the benefits, what benefits there are. It's not clear to me that there are substantive benefits at the moment, but what benefits there are at least middle class and above. Mostly, it's benefiting the tech oligarchs. I mean, that's who it's primarily benefiting. So that's problematic and can be dealt like this is just in practice. In principle, like, it's possible to correct those mistakes, but it's very difficult because of the amount of money it costs to build data centers. I mean, when Microsoft builds an enormous data center in the US, it's tens of billions of dollars, right? We don't have tens of billions of dollars in South Africa or Zimbabwe. Like, it's just not a thing. And then, like, recognition of justice, so respect for identities, languages, worldviews, and avoiding stereotyping and erasure, right? So because of the power discrepancies, everything's kind of focused on the global north, and global south is kind of sidelined to some extent. Again, this can be fixed, but it needs to be fixed. And one way it can be fixed is through procedural justice. So who has a seat at the table? Who has a veto in design and evaluation and governance? And it can't just be some kind of token global south representative that's, like, put on the board of OpenAI or whatever the case might be. They actually have to have power, because representation without power is completely meaningless. And finally, like restorative justice, right? So repairing past and ongoing injustices, such as those highlighted by, like I mentioned, the growing literature on digital colonization. Okay, so I think those are a kind of a broad spectrum of things to look at, and I don't really have the solutions. I think for me the biggest problem is that it's very difficult for the global south to fix these problems themselves because of the power and the money required. Yeah, sorry, I see a comment saying epistemic injustice. Sure, that for me that fits under recognitional injustice. So the worldviews, the languages, all of that kind of stuff are being marginalized. So African voice is being marginalized. Your testimonial injustice and so on falls into that category.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Russell, do you want to come in there? I see you have quite a interesting story to tell.
Well, thank you. I just, working in a high school, some kids, the teachers discovered on the staff, some of them discovered that essay question was just put into AI. They reproduced that. The kids' parents were called in. The parents said, well, it's okay. The kids feel and think exactly what the AI produced, so we don't see what the problem is. And I just wonder what the impact of this is going to be on education, and especially tertiary education. It seems to me like there's huge questions out there that really maybe in the kind of ethical, moral realm that need to be considered. I just sort of touched on a bit.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I was. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I was at the University of the Free State last week, and someone asked exactly the same question, but it wasn't a student at the school. It was a student at a university saying, yes, but I put this into AI and it came up with exactly what I thought. So what's wrong with that? And the thing is that, first of all, you've got to ask the question. Don't you think you might think that because AI told you that? And so this is a classic case of the biases of the model, like being projected onto you, and then suddenly they're your beliefs. Like, don't you think it's a bit of a coincidence that you believe exactly what ChatGPT told you? I mean, yeah.
Aisha, please go ahead.
So yeah, I'm listening to what people are saying and Russell speaking about students, and it's making me think that at the moment, I almost feel as if the conversations on AI are a top to bottom experience. Like, the educators and the people in charge speak about it. But I wonder, like, if there's place for student-centered responses to AI. And for us to begin to think about what does it mean for students and how, because then we also run the risk of being the people in charge who decide and take the decision. But then what does it also mean to be a student in a university, and how does AI change the way they're learning, or does learning even take place? So I almost like wonder if there needs to be a little bit of a inclusivity to include students' voices in the AI conversation as well.
Just to comment on what you're saying, Asha, I completely agree, because voice is extremely important. And actually, the project we're working on at the moment actually asks students quite a lot of these questions. And some of the feedback that you get is, I use it to translate words that I don't understand. It's a language issue, or the jargon, academic jargon is too much. I don't get it. It goes over my head. So I try to interpret it. Sometimes I don't understand what the assignment question is actually asking, and then I ask it to put it in simpler terms. So there is a learning taking place. And I guess we just need to figure out what it is and how much. So I completely get that. Michael, I also saw you added something. Do you want to explain what Kate Crawford's Atlas of AI is, just in short terms?
Yes, so Kate Crawford is one of this group of tech insiders who have turned incredibly vocal critics. So there's a foundation in the US called the Data and Society Foundation, which was set up by a group of HCI researchers like Hema, but who challenge kind of certain foundational views of artificial intelligence. And Kate Crawford's probably the most critical of the lot, along with Timothy Gaibru and others. So I think her work has really received a lot of attention. Obviously, she's a researcher from the global north, but she's very sensitive to the global power dynamics, and also to the kind of socio-technical understanding. So one of the things about AI, of course, is it depends entirely on humans. It's not a machine as we understand it. And I think Hema was saying models, data. We're dealing with a kind of form of statistics and statistical operations. So learning itself is a kind of recursive function undertaken with statistical operations. So this is the automation of statistics in very complex mathematical spaces. But it's not really more than that. So as a machinery, we get a misleading impression when we think of a kind of Terminator behind the scenes. So I think Kate Crawford's really, really good at opening up all of these kind of mythologies which extend into the public, and sort of unpacking them one by one. Very good in the environmental damage, very good in the kind of uses and misuses of the terminology as well. So she's very prominent, but she's also providing a platform for researchers around the world through a series of seminars. So I thought, as the kind of one of the more prominent figures, she's interesting. It's a book which has received a lot of attention and is apparently very readable. So.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Do we have any other questions for Hema or Ben before we move on to Sabrine? Okay. So Sabrine, my questions for you is obviously particularly about decolonization. I guess that's the crux of the matter. And if I'm trying to draw synergies between decolonial tenants or colonial tenants and AI, I see issues of power, I see issues of labor, I see economy, I see subjugation, I see ownership, I see erasure. So when scholars say we have to decolonize AI, what do we actually mean? Could you perhaps give me an example?
Yeah, sure. So it has been since the inception of AI, this sort of a discourse around the coloniality of AI has taken place. And so people are concerned about these very close to home issues that AI has. We find in the media, the big names in AI talking about AI taking over the world and those, dystopian scenarios. But there are issues that are much closer than that. For the globe, for the environment, for the communities. So decolonization of AI is essentially a re-examination of all of those matters. How is this technology actually amplifying the structural discrimination, the patterns of structural discrimination that were left behind by colonization of the last few centuries, and how it's actually amplifying all of those inequities and the inequalities in different social domains, and then basically trying to understand in different stages of the AI cycle, from the data collection to the processing to the compute to the deployment and the policy making, who all are responsible for creating the systems, who all are bearing the risks, who all are paying for the kind of damage that is happening to the environment, as well as the extraction, the unethical extraction of resources and labor. So all of these discussions come under the subject of decolonization of AI.
Okay, given what you say, and I apologize for the very normative question, but do you think AI needs to be decolonized? Is it a thing? Like, and why do you say so? If that, whatever your response is.
Absolutely, absolutely, because we are seeing extremely similar patterns of extraction, of abuse, of exploitation, violence in some cases where people are, for example, I can give you different examples because AI is not a monolithic kind of a technology. In fact, it's a meta technology. So it has applications in so many different fields. And therefore, the implications and the issues that it has they are also diverse. And the fact that it is actually very similar to the kind of tools that were used for colonization of resources, of peoples, and the same kind of the logics that were used in order to centralize the Euro-Western, the Euro-American view of technology, of human race, of ethics even. Even the field of AI ethics is extremely westernized. The way technology is perceived in the Euro-American context is very different from the way technology or science may be perceived in India or in the African or the Far East Asian context. So this sort of a universalization of discourse around AI is what is the biggest concern for scholars of decolonization of AI. And this idea of making this a monolithic technology that is that just takes and doesn't give anything back to the communities that are worst affected, that I think is an alarm. So therefore, it absolutely must be decolonized.
Okay, that's interesting you say that. Now, my big concern is the impact of AI on transformation agendas. I mean, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the, the 4IR moving into the 5IR and all of this. But what impact does AI as a tool or its developers, all-inclusive term, Ben, what impact does that have on already marginalized groups and indigenous peoples who are trying to, come out of the shell? You're seeing a lot of, indigenous languages being developed, etc., etc. Yeah, what is the impact of AI on the transformation agenda globally?
The impact is obviously very diverse, and the issues of concern are that much of because the globe is extremely diverse when it comes to its communities. Let's talk about just the environmental impact.
Sorry, Sabrina, you're breaking up a bit. Let's just give her a second.
Hopefully she knows. Okay.
Yeah, I
Yes,
sent the
I'm
message
sorry.
in the.
I got get. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, sure.
Continue. I'm sorry for the disruption. So the environmental impact, if let's talk about that, which is very central to the whole sustainable goals development issue. Well, we know for a fact that the carbon footprint of AI technologies is far more than even the aviation industry. So this is going to have serious impacts, and it's going to have diverse and different kinds of impacts. For example, I'm from a region of India which is close to the Himalayas. So the impact of climate change within the Himalayan region is very different from the impact of climate change in different other different regions. So people who are not even involved in the production of AI systems and technologies will have to pay the cost of these technologies without being benefited in any way. So all of these factors are to be considered. There are other studies that talk about the labor, the cheap labor, and almost the kind of exploitative labor that exists in the data labeling process. So we talked about how data is central to all AI systems, but then how does that work? You need human intervention, labeling of each and every image, and that supervision that is required. And there are cases and studies that were done that less than $10 a day is given to people who work in these facilities, whereas the companies that are making money out of this are billion-dollar companies. So these kind of inequities that we find between the people who are being profited and the people who are actually doing the job. And for example, our data, our communication, our texts, our social media posts, our writings, and all of the data that exists on the internet is taken without consent. and used to train AI models. And that is also an ethical issue. What exactly would be what exactly is the future of copyright? What exactly would we understand with the concept of privacy and internet use? And all of these things are related to that. The language domination, I would say, the fact that most of AI technologies are dominated by the English language, that is also an issue, because you have most of the work that most of the world that doesn't speak the English language, so they don't have access to these technologies, they don't have access to the development or even to the benefit that these technologies could bring them. So that there are multiple issues that are related with these systems.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that, Sabrine. Me and my ivory tower question, is it possible for an AI system to be developed that challenges the status quo in terms of economic power? Is there a possibility for a government, for example, in South Africa to say, we're going to, as a public entity, going to put our heads together to develop something that represents us in a better way? Do you think that would challenge the status quo in any way?
Absolutely, there are very promising debates and discussions that are being taking place. Firstly, technologically speaking, we saw the development of DeepSeek, which is a Chinese technology, and much of what actually happens in this arena of technology is all very enmeshed with political and geopolitical strategies. So the development of DeepSeek had significant effects for the political relations between the West and China as well. So yes, obviously there would be the kind of dynamics that we find in today's world. Some have argued a multipolar world order. We would see AI being used as the new weapon, something the likes of naval technology was for the colonial powers, or air power was for for the US and its domination. Maybe AI is for the future. So yes, absolutely, I do feel. But there are other things which may be discussed in this discourse. For example, decolonial authors and decolonial scholars, especially in the field of AI, are talking about using indigenous ethical systems. So one of which is Ubuntu, which is this model of understanding society as a collective. So I am because you all are. That's the concept, that's the African concept of community and collective consciousness. And scholars, it's very promising to hear scholars actually trying to argue what would an AI system actually look like if this was the point of departure for a system like that. So where the collective benefit is taken into account, and not in a way in a utilitarian way, but in a way wherein each and every individual's benefit is prioritized.
Thanks, Sabrina. Now, AI, we have seen the power of AI can be used for good, but also for enormous evil, so to speak. And you mentioned the notion of Ubuntu. How can decolonial theory help us guide AI research and AI policy? What is it that we need to be cognizant of?
The various factors. Firstly, the identification of where all the issues, the ethical issues lie, and who are the actors that are involved, or what all changes need to be taken place when it comes to policy making regarding related to each and every field. So, for example, if I were just to give you an example, let's talk about AI in healthcare. So, 86 it has been in the research that 86% of genomic research in the world is carried out on the genes of people with white ancestry. And that's just 12% of the global population. So researchers would argue that how much benefit we could get if we could just expand the percentage of genomic material used for research. So obviously the impact would be massive for the industry as well. And most importantly, to deal with the ethical implications that it has, I think that's absolutely significant that we take the measures. Now, there are different kinds of measures that people are taking. For example, some people are sort of discussing how there needs to be a reverse tutelage. So if you are impacting, let's say, a sub-Saharan community, it must be that you must learn from them ways and their sort of systems of knowledge production and how they perceive knowledge and tools and technology. So there has to be this exchange. Or for example, AI in research in particular, we see a very stark bias when it comes to research from the global north being high up in the percentage in major journals like Nature, but research from the south is not as highlighted. So we could use AI and we could use systems like these to address issues like that. So there are initiatives both from government or from international organizations like the UN and government organizations as well. But the field is so new that it's going to take a long time, firstly, to address the newer issues that would actually arise. They're new every day. There is a new, application of AI or maybe a new AI system being developed, but with it comes the newer ethical implication that it brings. So it's going to take some time, but everything is going hand in hand, as it seems right now.
Okay. I think that's a really interesting observation that you make there. But what I'm getting from everyone is that the issue of money, the issue of power, and the issue of human resources seems to be the issues that we are facing in the global south at the moment. We have a lack of that, and that is the biggest hindrance to, shifting or disrupting the status quo. Is there any other questions for either Prof. Ben, for Sabrine, or Prof. Hima before we move into our concluding statements? Zahra, you had a question?
And I mean, maybe it fits into the concluding questions, but I was sort of I'm really interested to know from Hima, to what extent AI developers are thinking through or concerned about issues that Ben and Sabrine have raised. I mean, I know that part of the colonial legacy of institutions, of higher education institutions, is sort of a siloization of knowledge, and that if you did computer science, you're unlikely to have heard of the word sociology, and if you're doing sociology, you're unlikely to have heard the word algorithm. So, I mean, and I'm sort of speaking about obviously undergrad 20 and 10 years ago. But I'm wondering to what extent now, these issues are being raised in for example, undergraduate computer science programs. And I mean, I probably should know more. I'm at the university. But yeah, I'm just sort of interested to know that.
Thank you. I was actually jotting down some notes while I was hearing to Ben and Zahra. I would like to quote what the godfather of AI, who's Geoffrey Hinton, said about, so we need to disengage the risks from benefits. So with this one cohort where there is definitely a risk where people are talking about, will AI will ever take over us? Will it overtake us? And one of the things that, like, my kids, one is at university and one is at high school, when they use ChatGPT, they always say, please, can you answer this question? And after that, they say, thank you. And I always wondered. So I asked, why do you do that? And they are like, oh, mommy, once AI takes over, they know that we were very obedient, we gave respect, so it will not come to us. So that's one side of the thing where, there is impact on jobs, there is impact on skill sets, and we need to distinguish between what AI can do or who it can replace, to what happens if AI goes into the wrong hands or is being misused. And I think that's the most important question. And from all the talk that I have picked up, that we have discussed so far, that's the most important part. What if it's not used in the right way? So we said, students use ChatGPT or students use some of the models and we use some of the models. That's the misuse of AI for wrong intentions. That's one risk. And as of now, it's also made clear by Jeffrey to say that at this point in time, we are able to create viruses, as Prof. Ben said, within minutes. You don't have to have deep knowledge about how to create these malware and so on. AI can assist you to do that. I think at this point, at this juncture, unfortunately, the exponential growth in AI is not going hand in hand with the exponential growth towards developing policies, frameworks around legal and ethical use of AI. And that's the gap that we are currently experiencing. AI is, it's going at a speed, and the policies that needs to regulate the development, deployment, and use of AI at educational institute or at any level, they are not aligned to that degree. And I think that's the gap that we are currently experiencing. And yes, they are research groups, they are researchers that are mainly focusing on how do we minimize that gap. It's a slow process, a painful process, but there is some hope out there to say that we need those frameworks in place. And coming
Ben,
to
you had a
the
question?
undergrad, coming to the
Sorry, go ahead.
undergrads, yeah. So how do we? I totally agree. Computer science might know nothing about sociology, and a sociology student might know nothing about. I actually had instances where students were taking interdisciplinary, like computer science and psychology, and I have seen those students doing very well in terms of how they project, how they talk about their projects or AI systems that are being developed, the issues around AI systems and so on. I think we need to more or less look at new curriculum designs. Previously, the existing curriculum worked for us. Perhaps now it's the time to merge ideas from different domains so that the students do have an understanding of the implications of going forward, if that's what the field that they are going to look at.
Thanks, Professor. Ben, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, just a comment to add to what Hima was saying on the regulation side of things. I think it's a dreadful shame that AI didn't follow the kind of CERN model where all the greatest scientists from around the world got together in Brussels and built this hadron collider, because what we have now is this arms race between the US and China. And accompanying that arms race is a deregulation race, and it's just not in either party's interests to regulate the development and expansion of AI in any way, shape, or form. And this is very clear through Donald Trump's policies. He's deregulated, and without the US-China collaboration, this would be inevitable anyway. China wouldn't have the regulations either. But yeah, I mean, I suppose that the point is that my concern is that the lack of regulation is utterly inevitable, given the arms race that we find ourselves in. And as a result, I'm really deeply concerned about where this is going to
go. Any other comments? Okay, so just a last question. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to just take this up because we were talking about the interdisciplinary nature of sociology and computer science. Usually we don't have that at the a university level, but because much of my research is based on that, and Michael is my supervisor, as he rightly said. It is we have to understand algorithms and these, AI in general as being completely socially embedded. These are not isolatory technologies. They are completely socially embedded. It is what we input in the system. So the biases, obviously, as we discussed, is in the society. It's just amplifying those biases and those power structures. So, but there's an interesting discussion that AI developers usually have, and which is that for the first time in history, we have a technology that may not become obsolete. So because AI systems have like an inherent tendency to improve themselves. So the more data, the more nuance in the data, the more improvement in the algorithm, you can actually go from a lower version to a better version. And so therefore, like other technology, it may not go obsolete. And what that means is that there is room for development and room to decolonize it. If we have the systems in place, there is room to actually have completely autonomous AI systems that represent, let's say, the sub-Saharan understanding of technology and how that impacts society, or let's say an Indian version of AI that addresses the context-specific visions of that particular society. Thank you.
Thanks, Sabrine. I think it's very interesting. And someone mentioned earlier on that the politics of AI cannot be divorced from the tool itself. I mean, already if you see the censoring that happens in China, when you go there, you can't access, Google or Microsoft or whatever. And when you go to Russia as well, try to go to Facebook, it's completely blocked. You can't go there. And I think almost on the one hand, it's a way of protecting, but at the same time, it's also a way of, cutting people off. So it's trying to find that balance. And I know, in conclusion, I know this question was obviously addressed in various shapes and forms. But just once again to all the speakers, do you foresee a decolonized AI landscape in the future, in the global South particularly? Do you think that in 5 to 10 years from now, given how fast things are moving, that we're going to see things changing for the better? Or is it just going to be, like someone mentioned earlier, this race to be the best? Sabrine, I'll start with you, and then Prof. Hima, and then I'll end off with Ben.
Yes, absolutely. I'm pretty optimistic with that, because the awareness has already taken over and people have been working on it. And initiatives like the Summer Tech in Kenya and other startups in different African countries. We have various initiatives in India as well, and obviously China and Russia, they have their own AI ecosystems. So I'm very optimistic with that. And this idea of decolonization is taking up, if it is taken up by international organizations like the UN and the other organizations as well, I think the process would be much faster than it is right now. But the only obstacle that we have in the path is that the growth of AI systems is extremely fast. I mean, doing a PhD in AI is an impossible task, and people, actually developers, don't have they discourage students from doing that, because by the time 4 years are over, the landscape would be completely different. So the work that has to be done with the decolonization of AI has to be at the pace of the development of the technologies. So it has to be really fast, really efficient, has to have the backing of governments and international organizations with scholars in interdisciplinary fields working hand to hand.
Okay, thank you very much, Sabrine, for your closing comments. Prof. Hima?
Thank you. So I agree with Sabrine. There is definitely a positive outlook. I think the most difficult bottleneck, or the most difficult task, was to recognize that there is a problem. And we do now have a scenario where we are able to recognize there is an issue and we are working towards it. As we have said before, there is kind of a mismatch between the development of AI systems and the frameworks that are developed around the deployment and use. And as soon as we are in a position to have a well-inclusive system, the global South and global North are coming hand in hand to develop these systems. And there is a good amount of measures to make sure that these systems are not biased, they're being fair. There is definitely a positive outcome. But we do need some work around it.
Okay. Thanks, Profima. Ben.
Thanks. I think I'll answer in two parts. Do I think that there'll be AI systems that can communicate very well in African languages that are sensitive to Ubuntu ethics and so on? Yes, they're already developing these things. University of Pretoria has a project that's doing something like that, and I think that's right. Do I think that the power structures, exploitation of both people and the environment, do I think that's going to be unwound? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So long as the people that have the power are benefiting from that exploitation, the exploitation will continue. And that's I just don't see that. Certainly not in the near future. Yeah. Not in the next 50 years.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions or comments before we close the session today? It's been very interesting. I think we've answered the question: Does AI need to be decolonized? And absolutely. It comes across in the labor, it comes across in the economics, it comes across in the algorithms and how we put things together. And I guess it is all about the data. And if we're basing our tools on data that is biased and colonial, we cannot expect to get unbiased data on the other side. So thank you very much for addressing a very, very important topic and for explaining the technicalities and the philosophical implications of that. So thank you, everybody. And hopefully we can pick up a similar discussion quite soon. Bye. Thank you for joining.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Sina,
Hi, Zahra.
I was hoping that
stopped
we
recording.
get. I was hoping
Yes,
that we